She was crying in the snow with nothing but a grocery bag and a secret. He offered her a coat, not knowing she was the richest woman in the state. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The wind bit harder than usual that morning, slicing through Michael Turner's coat like it had something personal against him. He tightened his grip on the grocery bags and glanced down at Lily, who trudged beside him with her knit hat pulled low and her mittens trailing threads like tiny flags of surrender. Snow had already piled ankle-deep, with more promised before nightfall. Michael didn't need a forecast. His knees were the best weathermen in town, and right now they were screaming. They'd only planned to grab a few things: milk, eggs, the on-sale cereal Lily liked. But Michael had miscalculated the weight of 5 full bags and the long walk back to the car parked far across the icy lot. Lily offered to carry one, but he waved her off. She was only 7. She shouldn't be worried about groceries or bills. That was his weight to carry. He popped the trunk and began loading the bags when Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "why is that lady crying?" Michael looked up. Across the lot, huddled near the return carts, sat a woman on the curb. Her back was to them, but her shoulders shook in small, rhythmless spasms. One hand clutched a paper grocery bag, the other was pressed to her forehead, as if she could hold her emotions inside by force. He hesitated. They were already late getting home. The roads were icing, and God knew his gas tank was flirting with empty again, but none of that mattered as much as the look on Lily's face. She wasn't asking if they could help. She was asking why no one else already had. Michael sighed and closed the trunk. "Stay in the car, okay?" he said, ruffling her hat. He approached slowly, boots crunching against the salt-slick pavement. The woman didn't look up. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you all right?" She startled, wiping her face quickly with her sleeve. "I'm fine," she said too fast, too firmly. Michael slipped off his coat. "I've heard that tone before," he replied, draping it around her shoulders. "Doesn't fool me." She finally met his eyes. There was gratitude in them, yes, but also something deeper, something haunted. And just like that, a quiet winter morning began to unravel into something far bigger than either of them could have expected. She looked like she didn't belong there, too put together, too polished to be sitting on the freezing concrete curb outside Miller's Market. But there she was, curled into herself, a thin coat wrapped tight around her frame like armor that had seen better battles. The wind teased loose strands of dark hair from her ponytail, tangling them across her face as she hugged a brown paper grocery bag to her chest like it was the only thing holding her together. Michael didn't mean to stare. He just hadn't expected to see someone like her in a place like this. Maple Hollow wasn't exactly a stop on any elite itinerary. He'd passed women in trouble before, back when he worked long shifts at the tire shop outside the city. But this wasn't the city. This was his town. And something about the way she kept her head down, blinking back whatever storm she was holding in, he couldn't walk away. He cleared his throat as he approached, his footsteps crunching over old ice patches. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept staring down at the salt-streaked pavement like it held the answer to a question she was too tired to ask. "You okay?" he asked, voice low, careful not to startle her. The woman looked up slowly, as if lifting her head took more strength than it should have. Her eyes were rimmed red, but her jaw was set firm like she wasn't about to let a stranger see her break again. "I'm fine," she said softly, even though her hands trembled as they clutched the bag tighter. Michael crouched a few feet away, not too close, but not far enough to ignore the shiver in her voice. "You don't look fine." She let out a half-laugh, half-sob that cracked in the cold air. "Didn't realize there was a dress code for emotional breakdowns." Michael smiled gently. "Nah, just tends to draw attention when you cry outside a grocery store in 20-degree weather." She shook her head, more embarrassed now than upset. "I just needed a minute, that's all?" He nodded, still watching her carefully. Sometimes a minute turns into too long. Want to ride somewhere warm?" She hesitated, looked him over, looked at the child seat in his back seat, then back at him, and slowly, like someone deciding whether or not to trust gravity, she whispered, "Maybe just 5 minutes." Michael didn't think twice. His jacket was nothing special, just a faded brown canvas coat with a tear near the wrist and the faint scent of motor oil in the seams, but it was warm, and right now, that was what mattered. He slid it off and gently draped it over the woman's shoulders before she could protest. She stiffened at first, then blinked up at him like no one had touched her with kindness in a long time. The coat swallowed her frame, its sleeves hanging past her hands, but she didn't shrug it off. "No one should be alone in this kind of cold," he said, his voice even. He didn't ask what had happened, didn't press for details. She looked like someone who'd had enough questions thrown at her already. She adjusted the collar, tugging it closer to her neck. "Thank you," she murmured. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" Her voice cracked, and she quickly bit it off. Michael offered a soft shrug. "You don't have to explain anything. We all have days like this." She glanced down at her shoes, expensive by the look of them, but thin-soled and completely wrong for this weather. Her breath puffed in uneven clouds as she tried to hold herself together. "I didn't plan for any of this." Michael nodded, as if he understood, because in a way he did. Life had a habit of throwing you sideways when you were already barely standing. From inside the car, Lily watched through the fogged-up window, her little face pressed to the glass. Michael waved at her and smiled, then turned back to the woman. "Look," he said gently, "I'm not trying to scare you or pry, but if you need a lift somewhere, just somewhere warmer than this curb, I can help." For a moment she didn't answer, just looked at him like she was searching for the catch, but there wasn't one. Just a man in a flannel shirt and worn jeans, offering something far rarer than pity. "I'm Michael," he added, extending a gloved hand. She looked at it, hesitated, then took it slowly. "Elise," she said softly. "Just Elise." And though the moment was quiet, the weight of it settled between them, two strangers in the snow, one offering a coat, the other holding on to it like it might be the only warmth she had left. She sat in the passenger seat, Michael's jacket still draped over her shoulders like a borrowed life. The heater hummed as warmth crept through the old vents, fogging the windows slightly, but not enough to erase the tension in her posture. She held the grocery bag in her lap, fingers curled tight around its folded top, as though letting go of it might unravel something else. Michael didn't say much. He never did when someone looked like they were trying to hold themselves together, but he glanced at her once, then again, noticing how her eyes kept flicking toward the side mirror, watching, waiting, like someone might suddenly appear and yank her back into a life she wasn't ready to return to. "You got someone you want me to call?" he asked gently, keeping his hands on the steering wheel even though the car wasn't moving. She shook her head. "No, no one." It wasn't just an answer, it was a wall, final, but not angry, just worn thin from being asked too many things by people who didn't listen to the answers. "Well," he said, trying to offer something easier, "I'm Michael Turner. That's my daughter Lily, in the back." Elise turned slightly and offered a small smile to the little girl, who was watching her quietly with wide, curious eyes. "Hi, Lily," she said softly. "Hi," Lily whispered, then smiled, instantly trusting. Michael turned back to Elise. "And you are?" There was the briefest pause before she replied, "Elise." He waited for a last name, but none came. She looked down at her hands, then out the window. Her gaze swept the lot, lingering on the exit, on the rows of cars, on every detail except him. "Just Elise," she added, as if she'd used that line before, as if a name without a past could protect her from something chasing behind it. Michael nodded, accepting it without a second thought. "All right then. Just Elise? Want me to take you somewhere?" She hesitated, then gave the faintest shake of her head. "Nowhere in particular, just not here." Her voice was calm, but her eyes told a different story. And even though he didn't know it yet, Michael had just stepped into something far more complicated than a cold morning and a stalled car. The silence in the car had settled soft but heavy, like snow on a rooftop. Michael kept his hands on the wheel, not driving anywhere yet, just giving her time. Elise sat curled slightly toward the window, his jacket still wrapped around her like a blanket she wasn't ready to give back. Her eyes had stopped darting, but they hadn't relaxed either, just settled into something quieter, still alert, still guarded. From the back seat came the unmistakable crinkle of a wrapper. Michael glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily was digging in her jacket pocket with the kind of seriousness only a child could have about candy. She pulled out a slightly lint-dusted red lollipop, examined it with a tiny frown, then smiled and leaned forward between the front seats. "Here," she said, holding it out toward Elise. "You look like you need something sweet." The offer landed with more warmth than the heater ever could. Elise blinked, startled, as if she wasn't used to kindness showing up without warning. She looked down at the little hand extended toward her, fingers smudged with markers and leftover crumbs from the snack Lily had been saving. It was such a small thing, just a child's candy, but it held the weight of something bigger. Innocence. Trust. A kind of generosity that didn't ask questions first. Elise reached out and took the lollipop, her fingers brushing Lily's in the exchange. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael saw it happen, saw the tightness in Elise's shoulders ease just slightly, saw her lips tug into something faint and rare, a smile, the first one he'd seen from her all morning. Lily sat back, satisfied, humming now, as if her work was done. Elise turned the lollipop in her hand for a moment before unwrapping it. She placed it gently between her lips and closed her eyes, just for a second. Not to taste the candy, really, but to feel the grace of being seen and comforted when she hadn't even asked for it. "Your daughter's got good timing," she murmured. Michael smiled. "She usually does." And for the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, Elise could breathe. Michael glanced over at Elise, her profile soft in the dim morning light, bleeding through the windshield. She was holding the now empty lollipop stick between her fingers like it was a compass, as if it might point her somewhere worth going. His jacket still hung from her shoulders, and even though the heater was doing its best, she hadn't unwrapped herself from it. He cleared his throat. "So, where to now?" She didn't answer right away, just stared out the window, watching a lone crow pick through the snowbank near the edge of the lot. When she did speak, it was quiet. "I'm not sure." Michael waited, hoping she'd follow up with something, an address, a name, a plan. But nothing came. Just that same vague fog that seemed to cling to her more stubbornly than the cold air outside. "Do you have someone you can call? Family? A friend?" She gave a small shake of her head. "Phone's dead. And the people I could call, I don't think I want to." That sentence settled between them like a truth too big to unpack. Michael nodded slowly, fingers tapping the steering wheel. Logic told him to offer her directions to the nearest shelter, maybe even call someone himself. But something deeper, something older, more human, told him she didn't need a rescue. She needed a safe pause. "I don't live far," he said. "I can take you there. You can charge your phone, warm up, figure things out. I've got coffee. And pancakes, if my daughter still remembers how to flip them without burning the pan." Elise looked over at him, finally, her eyes searching his face for any hint of expectation. But he was steady, calm, just a man offering a little kindness without asking for anything back. "You sure?" she asked, cautious. He nodded. "Yeah, pretty sure." A long pause passed, and then she whispered, "Okay." He put the car in gear and pulled out of the lot slowly, tires crunching over snow. As they turned onto the road, Elise finally leaned back, the tight line of her shoulders easing, just a little. Not safe. Not yet, but safer than she'd been. The drive out of town was quiet, the kind of quiet that hummed with questions neither of them wanted to ask. Snow whispered against the windshield in soft gusts, and the heater ticked with age as it pushed warmth through the old truck. Lily had fallen asleep in the back, her head tipped against the window, arms wrapped around her backpack like it held every treasure she owned. Elise sat with her hands clasped in her lap, gaze fixed ahead. She didn't look afraid anymore, just tired. The kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much alone for too long. "Here," she said suddenly, pointing toward a narrow, snow-covered trail that branched off the main road. "Take that left." Michael hesitated. The path looked barely wide enough for his truck, the trees closing in like a secret they weren't supposed to uncover. But he turned anyway, tires crunching over ice and dead leaves. They drove in silence until the trail opened up into a small clearing, and there it stood. An old cabin. It leaned slightly to one side, weathered wood, darkened by time and damp winters. The front steps were crooked. One shutter hung at an angle. No lights, no signs of life, just the skeleton of something that used to feel like home. "You're staying here?" Michael asked, trying not to let the disbelief show in his voice. Elise nodded. "It's mine, or it was my dad's. He used to come up here to get away from everything." She paused. "Guess I'm doing the same." Michael shifted in his seat, uneasy. "Does it have heat?" "There's a fireplace," she said. "And I brought some wood last week." "What about water?" "I'll manage." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she didn't have to play survivor just to prove she could, but something in her face stopped him. She didn't need saving, at least not out loud. "I'll check on you in a couple of days," he said instead. "If you need anything, anything at all, you have my number." She nodded, already reaching for the door handle. "Thank you, Michael, really." As she stepped out, Michael watched her cross the snow-covered yard and unlock the door. She didn't look back. He sat there for a long moment before driving off, the knot in his chest tightening. He didn't know what haunted her or what she was running from, but something about that cabin felt too quiet, too empty. The wind howled through the trees that night, slipping through the cracks in the old cabin walls like it had every right to be there. Elise stood in the center of the tiny kitchen, bundled in 3 layers of sweaters and Michael's coat, staring at the sink. She turned the faucet again. Nothing, not even a drip. The pipes had frozen. She closed her eyes and exhaled, slow and tight. Her breath came out in a visible puff, hanging in the air like smoke. The cabin was colder than she remembered, colder than it had any right to be for a place that once held her father's laughter, his old guitar playing off-key, his recipes written in pencil and smudged from use. She tried her phone for the 3rd time. Still dead. Still no service. The charger she had brought was useless without electricity, and the small solar pack she'd stashed in her bag hadn't seen sun all day. She was alone, and now she was really alone. She walked to the fireplace and knelt beside it, stacking a few logs with shaking hands. Her fingers had turned stiff from the cold, clumsy and uncooperative, but she managed to strike a match and hold it to the kindling. The flame caught slowly, flickering like it, too, was unsure whether it wanted to stay. Once the fire began to grow, she sat back against the wall, pulling her knees to her chest. The grocery bag still sat by the door, 1 loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter inside. Nothing else. It had been all she could grab when she fled that morning. She hadn't planned on staying long. She hadn't planned on needing anything, just space. But space had its cost. With trembling fingers, Elise reached into the side pocket of her bag and pulled out an old creased photo. Her father, grinning in front of this very cabin, arms slung over her shoulders, her cheeks flushed from laughter. She stared at it until her eyes blurred, the memory hitting harder than the cold ever could. "I don't know what I'm doing, Dad," she whispered. The tears came again, quiet this time. No dramatic sobs, just a slow unraveling. No one was watching now. No more masks to wear, just the fire, the silence, and the truth. By morning, the wind had eased, but the cold remained stubborn. The world outside the cabin was wrapped in a heavy hush, the kind that made everything feel suspended, frozen not just in temperature but in time. Inside, Elise stirred from sleep slowly, her body stiff, limbs curled under a threadbare blanket near the dying fireplace. The air bit at her nose, and the faint smell of ash clung to her clothes. She sat up and rubbed her eyes. No dreams, just a lingering ache behind her ribs that made her feel like she'd been holding her breath for days. Then came the sound, tires crunching on snow. Her head snapped up. She moved toward the window cautiously, heart thudding as she peeked through the frosted glass. A rusted old truck rolled into the clearing, the same one from the day before. Michael. Of course it was Michael. He climbed out slowly, his breath clouding in front of him, holding 2 bags and a dented steel thermos. He didn't knock right away, just stood there for a second, eyes scanning the old porch like he wasn't sure he was welcome. Elise opened the door before he could. "You really didn't have to," she said, voice scratchy from the cold. He offered a lopsided smile. "Didn't want you freezing to death before you paid me back that lollipop." She almost smiled. Almost. He held up the thermos. "Hot cocoa, not coffee. Figured cocoa might go down easier this early." She stepped aside without a word, a silent invitation that didn't go unnoticed. He entered and looked around, taking in the crooked walls, the faint glow from the coals, the tiredness in her face. "Pipes frozen?" he asked. She nodded, crossing her arms. "Among other things." Michael set the bags down on the rickety table and pulled out a loaf of bread, instant soup, matches, batteries, and a box of crackers shaped like animals. "Lily picked those," he said with a small shrug. "Said they make you feel less lonely." Elise looked at the crackers, then at him. She's not wrong. He handed her the thermos, and she took it with both hands, letting the warmth sink into her skin. "Why'd you really come?" she asked after a long pause. Michael shrugged. "Maybe I just had second thoughts about leaving someone to weather a storm alone." Elise didn't argue. This time she didn't send him away. Back home, the day passed in the quiet rhythm of small things. Michael fixed a leaking faucet, reheated soup for lunch, and tossed a load of laundry in the old washer that groaned louder with every cycle. Lily sat cross-legged on the couch, snacking on apple slices and flipping through the television channels with casual boredom, the remote oversized in her small hand. She stopped when she saw a dog in a commercial, then kept flipping. Click, a cooking show. Click, an old cartoon. Click, and then... "Daddy?" she called out. Michael was drying his hands with a dish towel when he walked into the living room. "Yeah, baby?" Lily pointed at the screen. "Isn't that Miss Elise?" He froze. The screen showed a crisp image of a young woman, dark hair, green eyes, unmistakable cheekbones, even in the slightly overexposed lighting of the press conference photo. Elise. The caption beneath her read, "Heiress of Sinclair. Hotels still missing. No leads confirmed." Michael sat down slowly, towel still clutched in his hand. The reporter continued, her voice urgent but practiced. "Elise Sinclair, daughter of late hotel magnate Thomas Sinclair, has been missing for several weeks. Family and legal representatives have released a statement urging her to make contact. The Sinclair estate remains in limbo as the board postpones decision-making in her absence. No foul play is suspected, but speculation continues to mount." Michael didn't hear the rest. He was too busy staring at the woman on the screen, the same woman who had been curled in his passenger seat, sipping cocoa, wrapped in his coat, and quietly unraveling. He remembered her hesitations, the way her eyes never stayed still, the weight behind her words when she said she didn't want to call anyone. It wasn't just a rough patch. She wasn't just running from pain. She was running from a world that expected her to wear a crown she clearly didn't want. "Is she in trouble?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael didn't answer right away. He just muted the television and stared at the frozen image of Elise's face. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I think trouble's been chasing her a long time." The next morning, Michael didn't bother with groceries or small talk. He didn't bring cocoa. He just drove down the winding road through the biting wind, heart heavier with each mile. The image of Elise's face on the news had branded itself into his thoughts. Not just Elise Sinclair, the Sinclair heiress. The face splashed across magazines, gala invitations, hotel brochures, and somehow she was curled up in a forgotten cabin outside Maple Hollow, sleeping beside a fireplace with frozen pipes and animal crackers on the table. When he reached the cabin, he parked, but didn't get out right away. His hands gripped the steering wheel as his breath fogged the windshield. Part of him wanted to drive away. Pretend he didn't know. Let her stay hidden if that's what she needed. But another part, stronger, steadier, knew she deserved the truth from him too. No more pretending. He knocked gently. The door creaked open a moment later. Elise stood there in an oversized flannel, his jacket still draped over a chair behind her. Her hair was tousled. She didn't smile. "You saw it," she said flatly. He nodded. "Come in," she added, stepping aside. Inside, the fire was burning better than before. She'd figured something out, at least. But the tension in the room was thick, undeniable. Michael stood near the fireplace, hands in his pockets. "Why didn't you tell me?" Elise didn't move. "Would it have changed anything if I had?" He paused. "Maybe not for me, but you were out there, freezing, alone. You didn't have to be." She leaned against the table, arms crossed. "That's the point, Michael. I needed to be alone, away from the board, away from lawyers, vultures, paparazzi, people who only see my name and not me." He studied her face, the tired creases, the sharpness around the eyes that hadn't softened even now. "So you ran." "I didn't run for attention," she snapped. "I ran because I couldn't trust the people closest to me. My father died, and before I could grieve, they were already circling, trying to carve up everything he built, including me." Her voice cracked. "They don't want me to lead. They want me to sign, smile, stay silent." Michael's voice softened. "And what do you want?" She looked at him, eyes wet but defiant. "I want to remember who I am, before the money, before the hotels, before I became a headline." Michael didn't press further. He just nodded and sat down across from her. "Then let's start there." Elise sat on the worn floorboards beside the fireplace, her legs tucked underneath her, and a half-empty mug of cocoa warming her hands. The cabin flickered with the soft orange glow of the fire, shadows dancing across the walls like quiet ghosts of a past she hadn't told anyone about, until now. Michael didn't speak. He sat nearby, elbows on his knees, just listening. He knew enough to wait, to let her fill the silence in her own time. "When my father died," she said finally, voice low, "everything happened so fast. The funeral, the press, the board meetings. I didn't even have time to breathe before they started deciding who I should be." She stared into the flames, as if they held the story she was trying to shape into words. They didn't say it outright, not at first, but then came the suggestions, strategic alliances, partnerships. And then, she laughed bitterly, an engagement, arranged, of course, to the son of one of the major stakeholders. Michael blinked. "Wait, you were engaged?" "Not really," she said, shaking her head. "I was offered like a chess piece, told it was the responsible move for the company's future, that love was a luxury and legacy was a duty." The words hung heavy. "I felt like I was suffocating in my own name," she continued. Sinclair was suddenly this brand, not a family, not a person, just a corporate asset. She looked up at him, eyes raw. "My father built that empire from the ground up, Michael. I watched him miss birthdays, work through illness, take calls at midnight, and I believed stupidly that it would all mean something when it was passed down." She looked away, blinking fast. "But the moment he was gone, the people who claimed to care about me turned me into a strategy, an image to protect, a role to play. So I left," she whispered. "I packed a bag, grabbed a little cash, and came here, to this cabin. It was the only place I could think of that didn't ask anything of me." Michael nodded slowly. "You didn't just run from them. You ran to yourself." Elise looked at him like she hadn't realized it until he said it. "Yeah," she said. "I think I did." The fire had burned low, casting long shadows over the cabin walls, the kind that stretched like quiet reminders of everything left unsaid. Michael leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching Elise gently fold the blanket she'd used the night before and tuck it into a crate by the hearth. She moved like someone who needed control of the small things because the big ones had long since slipped from her hands. "You don't have to freeze out here," he said, his voice calm but steady. "Come stay at my place, just for a few nights. The couch pulls out and Lily wouldn't mind one bit. She already thinks you're magic for liking her lollipops." Elise looked up, surprised, but not at the offer, at the kindness behind it. It was rare to be given something without strings, rarer still to believe it came from a place of genuine care. She set the blanket down and exhaled slowly. "I appreciate it," she said. "I do." He waited, "But I have to say no." Michael tilted his head. "Why'd?" She hesitated, as if searching for the right way to tell a man like him, a man who fixed things for a living, that this wasn't something that could be repaired with warmth and shelter. "Because I've been taken care of my whole life," she said finally. "By staff, by advisors, by people who smiled with their mouths and lied with their eyes. There's always been someone to open the door, carry the bag, make the call, and look where that got me." She met his gaze, her voice soft but firm. "If I come to your house, sleep on your couch, drink your coffee, I'll start needing it, depending on it, on you. And I can't do that, not right now. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not someone else's responsibility." Michael didn't argue. He just nodded, slow and understanding. "All right," he said, "but I'll keep bringing cocoa. No charge." A smile ghosted across her lips. "That I'll accept." And in that small exchange, beneath all the frost and fear, something steady began to form between them, not as rescuer and runaway, but as two people who were learning how to be whole on their own. The storm rolled in without warning, thick, fast, and cruel. By the time Elise noticed the sky shifting from gray to white, it was too late. Snow slammed against the cabin like a wave of glass shards, the wind howling through the trees, making the walls groan like they were remembering old wounds. The temperature dropped with every passing hour, the kind of cold that sinks into bone and doesn't let go. She stuffed towels under the doors, lit every candle she had left, and stoked the fire until her lungs burned from the smoke. But the heat wasn't enough. The ancient pipes cracked some time after midnight with a sound like distant thunder. Water hissed from the wall, then stopped, frozen. She wrapped herself in every layer she could find, 3 sweaters, 2 scarves, and Michael's old jacket. But still her fingers numbed. Her phone was finally charged, but no signal cut through the storm. The power flickered once around 2 a.m., then went dark for good. By morning, the world outside the cabin was gone, buried under thick drifts. Trees bent low like they were bowing to something merciless. Elise sat by the fire, which had dwindled to faint orange embers, and tried to pretend she could outlast it. But her teeth were chattering. Her breath came fast and shallow. Her pride, for the first time, wavered. She stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the screen. Michael's number was still there. For 10 minutes she paced the floor, muttering, debating, shaking from the cold and something deeper, something like fear and guilt, tangled into one. Then she hit call. It rang once. "Hey," came his voice, groggy but alert. She paused, swallowed. "It's Elise." A beat of silence. Then, "Are you all right?" She looked around at the dripping ceiling, the flickering candle, the cracked pipe, and the frost forming on the inside of the window. "No," she said quietly. "I need help." 10 minutes later, headlights cut through the whiteout. and when the knock came at the door she opened it without hesitation. Michael stood there, snow clinging to his coat, breath steaming in the air. "Couch offer still good?" she asked barely above a whisper. He smiled gently. Always was. Michael's house wasn't big, just a two-bedroom tucked at the edge of town with creaky floors and walls that remembered every winter. But it was warm, smelled like cinnamon toast and motor oil, and somehow felt safer than any penthouse Elise had ever stepped foot in. Lily was thrilled, of course. She barely let Elise get through the front door before pulling her toward her room, now their room, offering her the top bunk because it feels closer to the stars. Elise accepted with a quiet smile and a duffel bag that held more emotional weight than clothes. That first night, Elise read Lily a story about a lost fox finding her way home. Her voice shook a little at the beginning, unfamiliar with the ritual, but Lily didn't mind. She nestled under her blanket and listened like it was the most natural thing in the world. When Elise closed the book, Lily was already asleep, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, the other resting on Elise's arm. In the kitchen, Michael stood at the sink, scrubbing a pan with practiced rhythm. Elise joined him silently, watching the way his hands moved, efficient, tired, familiar. "You don't have to do that," he said, nodding toward the drying rack. "I want to," she replied. The sponge felt awkward in her hand. The soap slipped too fast, but she kept at it, her fingers red from hot water and effort. The first dish clinked too loud in the drying rack, the second less so. By the fourth, she started humming under her breath, something soft from childhood she hadn't realized she remembered. Michael didn't say a word, just washed, passed, and let her figure it out. Later, they sat on the couch with mismatched mugs, his filled with black coffee, hers with lukewarm cocoa, and the TV murmuring in the background. Elise glanced around at the tiny living room, the hand-drawn pictures on the fridge, the worn blanket draped over the couch arm, and felt something settle inside her. It wasn't luxury, it wasn't freedom, it was belonging. Maybe not forever, but for tonight, it was enough. The garage smelled like motor oil, rust, and the kind of honest work that clung to skin long after the shift ended. Sunlight poured in through the wide bay doors, catching flecks of dust in the air and warming the concrete floor where Elise stood, broom in hand, sleeves rolled up, and hair tied in a messy knot that kept slipping loose. She wasn't sure what made her ask to come with Michael that morning. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe guilt for sleeping under his roof. Or maybe it was the strange need to do something, anything, that wasn't running or hiding. At first he looked surprised. Then, without a word, he handed her a pair of safety goggles and pointed to the far corner. "Start with that bench. It's been collecting dust since before Lily could walk." And so she swept, and sorted, and stacked things she couldn't name into neat little piles. She found a strange rhythm in it, the satisfying scrape of metal on concrete, the click of organizing bolts by size. There was no boardroom here, no quarterly projections, just dirt, tools, and the occasional grunt from Michael beneath a raised truck. By noon, she was handing him wrenches like a seasoned assistant. "No," he grunted, "that's a socket wrench." She blinked, holding it up. "Aren't they all just wrenches?" Michael chuckled under the car. If someone said that in this shop 5 years ago old man Jensen would have had a heart attack. "Noted," she said, carefully switching tools. Throughout the day, she learned the difference between a timing belt and a serpentine belt, where spark plugs went, and how oil that looked like syrup was a bad sign. Her manicure was long gone, chipped and forgotten, and she'd never felt prouder of her stained hands. Later, as she sat on the curb outside the shop sipping from a lukewarm water bottle, grease smudged across her cheek, Michael sat down beside her. "Not bad for a rookie," he said. She grinned. "I used to read hotel quarterly reviews over breakfast. Today I learned that cars don't just run because you wish them to." Michael raised a brow. "You're catching on." She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. Wrenches and wonder, not a bad exchange for a broken past. The house was quiet that evening, wrapped in the kind of warmth that came not just from the heater humming gently through the vents, but from the smell of something baking. Box mix brownies, half burnt on the edges and perfect in the middle. Michael had made them after dinner, more as a peace offering for a rough day at the shop than dessert. Elise had helped, cracking the eggs with a little too much enthusiasm, laughing when the shell fell in and Michael fished it out with a butter knife. Now, Lily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, crayon spread around her like a sunburst, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Elise was stretched out on the couch, one arm thrown over her eyes, too tired to move, but too content to go to bed just yet. "Almost done," Lily mumbled to herself. 10 minutes later she padded over quietly, a piece of paper fluttering in her hand. "Here," she whispered. "I made this for you." Elise sat up slowly and took the drawing, her breath catching before she even registered why. It was crude, of course, crayon colors outside the lines, proportions wildly off, but it was beautiful in a way no photograph could be. A house with a crooked chimney and a sun that smiled too big. 3 stick figures stood out front, one tall with brown hair and blue eyes labeled Dad, one small with pigtails labeled Me, and one in the middle, a little taller than Lily, with long dark hair and a red heart drawn on her shirt. Underneath it, in bright block letters, Our New Family. Elise blinked hard, her chest tightened with something too big for words. Slowly she looked up at Lily. "You really think this is our family?" Lily nodded. "I know it is." And that was that. Later that night, when the house was dark and Lily snored softly from the bunk below, Elise folded the drawing and tucked it under her pillow like a secret she wasn't ready to let the world see, but one she wanted close, just in case. The bell above the garage door jingled, but it wasn't the usual clink of a customer in need of a tune-up. It was sharper, more deliberate, like someone who had rehearsed their entrance. Michael looked up from beneath the hood of a rusty Chevy and wiped his hands on a rag. The man who stepped in didn't belong. Too clean, too pressed. His coat looked expensive, but worn at the edges, like it had seen more than just boardrooms. Michael straightened slowly. "Can I help you?" The man smiled politely, but his eyes didn't. They were scanning the room, walls, tools, corners, measuring everything. "I hope so. Name's Barrett. I'm a private investigator working with the Sinclair family." He pulled out a badge, flashed it like a trick card. "Looking for someone. Thought she might have passed through here." Michael's stomach dropped, but he didn't flinch. He turned back to the engine casually, pretending to inspect the radiator while his heart beat louder than any tool in the shop. "Don't know the name," he said. Barrett walked slowly through the garage, tapping his fingers against a wrench on the workbench. Young woman, mid-20s, dark hair, green eyes, been missing a few weeks, very important to a lot of people that she's found. Michael shrugged. "People pass through. I fix cars. Don't keep tabs on everyone." Behind the curtain separating the office from the main shop, Elise held her breath. She stood motionless, pressed against the wall, her fingers digging into the hem of her sweater. She could hear every word, every footstep, every creak of the investigator's shoes on the concrete, and she knew one wrong sound, one flick of the curtain, and the life she was building would vanish like it never existed. Barrett finally stopped near the entrance. "Well, if you happen to see anyone fitting that description, I'd appreciate a call." Michael looked him in the eye. "Sure thing." The man left. No tire screech, no threat. Just the same sharp clink of the bell as he exited into the cold. A minute passed, then another. Michael finally stepped behind the curtain. Elise was still there, pale, shaken, silent. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just said, "He won't find you here." And she believed him, because when Michael Turner lied, it was only to protect the truth that mattered. Sunday morning arrived like a breath held too long finally being released. No sirens, no knocking, no headlines. Just the golden light of dawn creeping through the kitchen window, catching dust motes mid-drift and warming the worn linoleum floor. The scent of vanilla and batter filled the air, and somewhere in the background the radio played a song too old for Lily to know, but she hummed along anyway. Elise stood at the stove in Michael's hoodie, sleeves rolled 3 times over, holding the spatula like it was a tool of purpose. The first pancake had come out lopsided, the second burnt slightly on one edge, but the third was just right. Lily, perched on the counter with syrup already on her cheek, declared it officially perfect. Michael leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the two of them with a look he didn't wear often, ease, like the world had taken its foot off his chest for a moment and let him breathe. They ate at the little round table by the window, elbows bumping, laughter rising gently in between bites. Elise drizzled syrup like it was gold. Lily made a pancake sandwich with peanut butter and dared Michael to try it. He did, made a face, and they all laughed until Elise had to wipe tears from her eyes. After breakfast, they bundled up in mismatched gloves and coats and stepped into a backyard blanketed in white. The snow crunched underfoot, crisp and untouched. Lily ran first, launching herself into the powder with a wild giggle, and Elise followed, laughing in that unguarded way she was still getting used to. Michael packed a snowball, lobbed it gently at Elise's back, and the war was on. What followed wasn't elegant. It wasn't poised. It was messy, ridiculous, full of shrieking and slipping, and a snow angel that Elise insisted didn't count because Lily stepped on one wing. But somewhere in that chaos, something rare happened. Peace, not silence, not safety, but a deep, quiet sense that for once, nobody needed to be anywhere else. Not running, not hiding, just here, together. When they went back inside, cheeks flushed and clothes soaked through, Elise paused at the door. She looked around, Michael shaking snow from his boots, Lily peeling off wet mittens, and whispered almost to herself, "This feels like home." And for the first time, she didn't immediately correct herself. It started with a loose drawer in the workbench. Elise had come to the garage early, hoping to surprise Michael by organizing the chaos he called his part system, which, to her horror, involved coffee cans labeled in Sharpie and screws sorted more by intuition than logic. She tugged at a rusted handle and the drawer stuck. One sharp yank later, it gave way, clattering open with a sound that echoed through the shop like a secret wanting out. Inside was a mess of sockets, washers, a folded-up photo of Lily as a toddler smearing grease on her cheeks, and tucked in the back, a small velvet box. Elise froze. She didn't mean to pry. She didn't even open it right away. But something about its placement, the careful way it was hidden among everything else, made her curious in a way that didn't feel like trespassing. It felt personal, quietly sacred. She opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver ring, its surface dulled by time but intact. Simple, no stone, no flash, just a soft engraving on the inside. Until the road ends. She was still staring at it when Michael walked in, wiping his hands with a rag. "You found it?" he said gently. No surprise in his voice. Elise looked up, caught somewhere between apology and reverence. "I didn't mean to snoop." He shook his head. "You weren't snooping. It finds whoever it wants." She held the ring up carefully. "It's beautiful." "It was hers," he said, voice low, eyes distant. "Grace, my wife." Elise stayed silent. "She gave it to me before I left for a job out of state. Said it wasn't for forever, just for the road. Just a reminder that I'd come back." He sat on the stool across from her. "I did. But cancer didn't care about promises. She was gone before Lily turned 3. Elise didn't offer a platitude, didn't reach for the right words. She just held the box in both hands like it was something sacred, then gently closed it and handed it back. "I'm sorry," she said, "and it wasn't hollow." Michael nodded. "Me too." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by grease and grief, Elise did something she rarely allowed herself. She simply listened. The cemetery sat on the edge of the next town over, tucked between a grove of whispering pines and a stone chapel that hadn't held a service in years. The road there was winding and half forgotten, and that's exactly why Elise had chosen it. She wore her coat buttoned to the throat, scarf tucked tight, fingers wrapped around a small bundle of white lilies. Michael drove without asking questions, Lily asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window. When they pulled in, Elise was the first to step out, boots crunching softly against the snow-laced gravel. She hadn't visited since the funeral. Too many eyes, too many cameras. Back then her grief had been folded into speeches and boardroom condolences, her father's legacy reduced to shares and headlines. But now it was just her and the man who'd raised her, not the mogul, not the empire builder, just the dad who used to burn toast on Sundays and sneak her into meetings with candy in his pocket. The headstone was simple, gray marble, no frills, just his name, the dates, and one quiet line beneath: he built more than buildings. Elise knelt beside it and brushed snow from the base. Her breath clouded in front of her face. Her hands shook, not from the cold, but from everything she'd carried and never said. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. "It's been a while." Behind her, Michael stood a few feet back, hands in his coat pockets, Lily at his side. He didn't move closer. He knew some things weren't meant to be heard. Elise laid the lilies down gently. "I'm sorry I left. I didn't know how else to breathe. They tried to make me into something I didn't recognize, and I let them. I thought if I ran, I could figure it out. Who I am. Who you raised me to be." Her voice wavered. "I'm not ready to lead, but I think I'm ready to come home." The wind picked up, rustling the trees like they were answering. She stood slowly, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of Michael's old hoodie. When she turned around, Lily reached out and took her hand without a word. And somehow, that said everything. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked inside a plain manila envelope with no return address, just her name, handwritten in a script she hadn't seen in months. The handwriting alone made her stomach twist. It was clean, familiar, steady. It was Wallace's. He had been her father's lawyer for over 2 decades, a man of few words but unwavering loyalty. She hadn't contacted him since she disappeared. She assumed he'd moved on, filed the reports, followed the board's orders, buried her absence in paperwork, but the envelope said otherwise. She sat on the edge of Michael's couch, the house quiet, except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock. Lily was at school, Michael was still at the garage, and for the first time in weeks, Elise was alone with her name again. Not Elise the helper, not Elise the mystery guest, not just Elise Sinclair. Inside the envelope was a short note from Wallace. "Per your father's instructions, this was to be delivered only when you were ready, not when the world said you should be, but when you knew. If you're reading this, I believe you're there. W." Beneath the note was a smaller ivory envelope. No seal, no monogram, just one line on the front, in her father's unmistakable scrawl, "For when you're tired of running and ready to build." She stared at it for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the flap, hesitant, afraid even. Because once it opened, once she read his words, she couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't hide behind being lost. She took a breath and broke the seal. The letter inside was only a single page, but it held the weight of a lifetime. "Elise, I knew they'd try to mold you into something sharp and shallow the moment I was gone. But I also knew you wouldn't let them. You were never meant to be a figurehead. You were meant to be the architect of something better. If you're reading this, I trust your heart has found the ground again. Lead with it. Not with power, not with fear, not with noise. Build something real, not for them, for you. You already know how. Dad." By the time she finished, her hands trembled, but her heart didn't. For the first time, she wasn't running from the legacy. She was walking toward it, on her own terms. Elise sat beneath the old elm tree in Michael's backyard, the afternoon sun bleeding through its bare branches in fractured streaks of gold. The wind was calm, the air cool but kind, the kind of day that didn't rush you. She needed that. The ivory envelope rested in her lap again, as if waiting for her to stop second-guessing what she already knew. She'd read her father's letter once in silence, then tucked it away like a precious thing she wasn't sure she deserved to hold. But now, with the sky wide open above her and the weight of the past days catching up in her chest, she unfolded it again. This time she let the words settle. The ink had smudged slightly at the corners, just enough to suggest her father had written it with trembling hands, maybe even through tears. It was only one sentence. Don't be who they expect. Be who you are. You already know the way. She stared at it, heart clenching. There were no instructions, no names, no titles or terms, just that. It struck her harder than any contract, any speech, any corporate legacy ever could. Her whole life, people had tried to define her. Elise Sinclair, Hotel Heiress, Elise Sinclair, the quiet daughter, Elise Sinclair, the missing woman. But not Elise, the person, not the girl who used to sneak out to build forts in the garden with her dad, not the teenager who preferred sketching spaces to reading reports, not the woman who now knew what it meant to build a fire from nothing, to fix a dish by hand, to read bedtime stories beside a bunk bed. That's who she was. Not the headlines, not the boardroom expectations. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket, pressing her palm to it like a promise. Michael's voice floated from the house, calling Lily in for dinner. Elise stood slowly, brushing leaves from her jeans. The wind picked up slightly, nudging her hair across her face. She smiled. She didn't need to plan every step now. She already knew the way. The house was still when Elise stepped into the kitchen, the sky outside still painted in pre-dawn blue. A half-moon hung low beyond the frosted window, casting a quiet silver glow over the sink and the counter where she had made pancakes just 2 Sundays ago. Her bag was already packed, sitting by the door. Simple, small, intentional. It held only what she needed, a clean blouse, her father's letter, and the courage she'd stitched together piece by piece in this house. She moved quietly, careful not to wake anyone, not yet. This part, this choice, was hers alone to carry. Michael's boots sat by the back door, still dusted with snow from the day before. She stared at them for a moment, remembering the way he stood in them the first time he handed her a wrench, the way he never once asked her for more than she could give. She found him in the living room, asleep on the couch, one arm tossed over his eyes, the other resting on an open book he'd never finish. For a moment she just watched him, how peaceful he looked, how steady. Then she knelt beside him and placed a folded note on the coffee table. No big declarations, just "Thank you for seeing me before I even remembered who I was. I'm going back to finish what I ran from, because of you." She hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Michael stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Elise stood, her throat tight but steady. She picked up her bag, zipped her coat, and glanced down the hallway. Lily's bedroom door was closed, her hand-drawn family picture still taped to it, fluttering slightly from the draft. Elise smiled and whispered, "I'll come back." The screen door creaked open, then shut softly behind her. The cold met her like an old friend, bracing, sharp, but honest. She walked down the porch steps and into the stillness of the morning, where a waiting taxi idled at the end of the drive. She was going back, not as the Sinclair heir, not as a headline, but as Elise. The house felt different without her. It wasn't just the absence of a voice or the missing sound of footsteps echoing down the hall. It was the silence that followed, a soft, lingering stillness that settled over everything. The couch stayed neatly arranged, the coffee mugs didn't pile up like they used to, and the bunk bed in Lily's room remained untouched. Elise had been gone for 12 days. Michael had counted every one of them, even if he pretended not to. Lily did too, in her own quiet way. She still left a space for Elise's cup at breakfast, still drew 3 people in her family pictures, even when her teacher said just 2 was fine. Sometimes she'd look out the window for a long time after dinner, as if expecting a knock at the door that never came. Michael watched her more closely these days, measured the way she smiled, how often it reached her eyes, how quickly it faded when no one was looking. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the whole world outside turned gold and quiet, Lily climbed up beside him on the porch swing. She pulled her knees into her chest, hugging them tight, her hair tucked under her chin like she was bracing against something invisible. "Do you think she's coming back?" she asked softly. Michael didn't answer right away. He looked out at the road, empty and still. Then he exhaled and wrapped an arm around her small shoulders. "I think," he said slowly, "some people come into your life to remind you what hope feels like, even if they can't stay forever." Lily was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded just once and leaned her head against his chest. "She made everything feel like magic," she whispered. Michael closed his eyes, holding her a little closer. "Yeah," he said, "she did." And though the swing creaked beneath them and the wind brushed against the trees, the silence that remained wasn't empty. It was just waiting. The rain came in soft at first, tapping lightly against the tin roof, but by nightfall it was a steady, unrelenting downpour, the kind that blurred the edges of the world and made everything feel suspended in memory. Michael sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in his hands, the porch light still on out of habit, not hope. Lily had gone to bed early, exhausted from a school play rehearsal where she played a squirrel with too many lines and not enough nerves. Michael had clapped the loudest in the audience. He always did. But even in the applause there was a missing echo, a glance toward the crowd that never landed on her face. Then came the knock. 3 soft raps, not loud, not desperate, just there. He stood slowly, his chair creaking across the floor. When he opened the door, rain spilled in from the storm, and standing there in the amber glow was Elise. Her hair was soaked, strands clinging to her cheeks. Her coat, one he didn't recognize, was heavy with water, sleeves pushed up just enough to show her trembling hands. No suitcase, no driver, just her. "I left everything behind," she said, breathless, eyes searching his like they were the only map she had left. "But I couldn't leave you." Michael didn't speak, not right away. He just stared at her, his memory of her somehow dimmer than the woman standing in front of him now. She looked tired, but more certain, like someone who'd stood in a storm and chosen to walk through it instead of waiting for it to end. He stepped aside, wordless, and she crossed the threshold. Water puddled beneath her boots as she stood in the same spot where she'd once read bedtime stories and poured batter onto a crooked pan. Her eyes were full, not with regret, but something else, something closer to peace. Michael took the coat from her shoulders gently and hung it on the hook by the door beside his own. She didn't need applause. She just needed to be home. The next morning came soft and gray, the rain replaced by a calm drizzle that left the world damp and hushed. The house smelled like toast and coffee, and the radio played low in the background, some old jazz tune that didn't ask to be noticed but wrapped itself around the walls like a blanket. Elise stood barefoot in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, carefully cracking eggs into a bowl. She moved slowly, like someone relearning the rhythm of a place after being away too long. Michael sat at the table watching her, not with suspicion, not with questions, but with the quiet wonder of someone realizing that a moment once lost had found its way back. They didn't talk about the board, or the headlines, or the fallout. Elise had returned with nothing but a backpack and a weary smile, but she'd left behind the weight that once shaped every step she took. She didn't want to be the mystery anymore. And Michael, he didn't need answers. He just needed truth. After breakfast, they cleaned the kitchen side by side. Elise washed. Michael dried. No instructions, no commentary, just shared silence that didn't feel empty. Later, they took Lily to the garage, where she spent the afternoon drawing chalk murals on the cement floor while Elise handed Michael tools with a confidence that surprised even her. When she didn't know what he needed, she asked. When she did, she smiled quietly as he nodded approval. They didn't fall back into what they were before. They didn't try to. This time wasn't about picking up where they left off. This was something new. They took walks in the evening, past the old oak trees that lined the back road, and talked about things that didn't matter, how the clouds looked like spilled flour, or how Lily's school was already casting parts for the winter play. They didn't rush the conversations, or the pauses, or the closeness. It wasn't about fixing anything. Not the past, not each other. It was about building something that didn't need to be flawless, only real. And for the first time, they weren't playing roles. They were just Elise and Michael, starting again, together. The town hall was packed tighter than usual, the kind of turnout reserved for controversial zoning changes or the annual chili cook-off debate. But tonight was different. No one knew exactly why the meeting had been called, just that a new proposal was on the docket, introduced quietly by someone who hadn't spoken publicly since her return. Elise sat near the front, hair pulled back, no designer blazer or security detail, just jeans, a cardigan, and that same steady gaze she'd brought back with her. When her name was called, she stood slowly and walked to the podium, not as a Sinclair, not as a headline, but as a neighbor. She cleared her throat, the microphone crackling slightly. "Hi," she began. "Some of you know me as Elise. Some of you know a version of me from a news clip or a rumor. But tonight, I'm just someone who's been watching how this town works, and more importantly, how it helps." She held up a small folder. "I've drafted a proposal for a community fund, one that would support small businesses, offer low-interest loans, and help local startups find their footing again. It's been a hard few years for a lot of folks, and I know firsthand how easy it is for people with power to forget where they came from." There were murmurs across the room, curious and cautious. "I'm not asking for attention," she continued, "or credit. In fact, the fund wouldn't bear my name at all. I'm calling it the Harvest Initiative, because this town has been sowing seeds of kindness for a long time. I think it's time we help it grow." She stepped back from the mic and waited. The silence was thick, but not hostile, just thoughtful. Mayor Jenkins stood. A nod. Then another voice chimed in from the back, Old Man Harper, who hadn't spoken in public since the library roof collapsed. "She's right," he said. "Time someone gave this town more than speeches." Then came the votes, one by one, hands raised, no objections, unanimous. Elise exhaled slowly, a weight she hadn't named lifting from her chest. No applause, no ceremony, just nods, murmurs of approval, and a line of people who afterward shook her hand not because of who she was, but because of what she did, and that meant more than her name ever had. The sun had already dipped low by the time they made it back to the house. The evening was warm enough to leave the door open, letting in the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Elise sat on the porch steps, her shoes kicked off beside her, a mug of tea cradled in her hands. Michael stood nearby, leaning against the railing, arms crossed, not in defiance, but in defense of something old, something long kept quiet. She glanced up at him, catching the way he stared out toward the trees instead of at her. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, then didn't. "I've been meaning to tell you something," he said, voice rougher than usual, "and I keep talking myself out of it." She didn't press, just waited. "When I was 10, he began, my dad walked out. No note, no warning, just gone. One minute he was fixing the screen door, the next he was a ghost." Elise's brow furrowed, but she stayed quiet. "My mom, she was tough as hell," he continued. "Worked 2 jobs, took night classes, somehow always made sure I had lunch money, even if she didn't eat dinner. but I watched her wear herself down to nothing just to keep the lights on. He took a breath, jaw tight. I told myself I'd never be like him, never leave, never quit. But the thing is... He paused, voice dropping. That fear never really left me. It crawled in and made a home, this whisper in the back of my mind that no matter how hard I tried, I'd end up just like him, not enough, not steady, not someone worth depending on. Elise set her mug down and stood slowly. She walked over to him, close enough to see the way his hands trembled slightly, even as he tried to keep them still. "You're not him, Michael." He looked at her, eyes raw. "You fix things," she said, "and not just engines. You show up, even when it's hard, even when no one asks." He laughed once, quiet and self-conscious. "I've never told anyone that." "I know," she whispered. "That's why it matters." And in the hush of twilight, two people who'd carried too much for too long let honesty sit between them like a promise. Not to be perfect, just to be real. The rain returned like an old memory, soft at first, barely more than a whisper on the roof, then steady, persistent, curling around the house like it remembered every word that had once been said beneath it. Elise stood at the kitchen sink, watching the drops race down the window pane, her hands wrapped around a dish towel she wasn't really using. The house was quiet, except for the sound of Lily's distant laughter from her bedroom and the rain's patient rhythm. Michael entered behind her, his steps easy, familiar. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the doorway and watched her. There was something in the way she stood, calm, unhurried, that made the air feel different, not lighter exactly, just steadier. "You still love the rain?" he asked gently. She turned her head just enough to catch his smile. "I think I do now." He crossed the room slowly, his steps careful on the old hardwood. She didn't move away, just kept looking at the water sliding down the glass like it had somewhere else to be. "Storm's supposed to last all night," he said. She nodded. "Let it." Silence settled between them, warm and unspoken. Outside, the wind tugged at the branches. Inside, it was just them, two people who had once stood on opposite sides of the world, now held together by something neither of them needed to name. Michael reached out, gently taking the towel from her hands, setting it aside. His fingers brushed hers, and she didn't pull away. "I don't know when this started," he said, voice low, "but I don't want it to end." Elise looked up at him, her eyes steady, full of the kind of emotion that didn't need to be dramatic to be real. "It doesn't have to," she whispered. He stepped closer. The kitchen lights were dim, casting a soft golden hue over the walls, their shadows blending together like a single silhouette. And in that quiet space, between rain and warmth and everything that had led them here, Michael leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't hurried, it wasn't uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that came not from longing, but from knowing, from safety, from everything unsaid finally finding its voice. Outside, the rain kept falling, but this time they were already home. The old truck had sat in the corner of the garage for months, dusty, stubborn, and half forgotten. Elise had pointed it out the first week she started helping Michael, drawn to it for reasons she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the color, a faded blue that reminded her of childhood skies, or maybe it was the way it looked just a little too proud to be junk. Michael had always said he'd get around to fixing it. "Someday," he'd mutter, wiping his hands on a rag as they worked on someone else's engine. Elise had smiled and nodded, not pushing. But now, on a bright Saturday, with nothing urgent on the list, that someday had finally arrived. They spent hours under the hood together, elbow-deep in grease and laughter, trading tools and teasing each other about who was messier. Elise, determined and unafraid, didn't flinch at the grime. She'd learned to love the honest dirt that came from work worth doing. And then, like magic, or muscle memory, or maybe just Michael's quiet brilliance, the engine coughed, stuttered, then roared to life. Elise stepped back, eyes wide, face lit with a grin so real it made Michael forget to breathe for a second. "You did it," she said. "We did," he corrected. Later that afternoon they climbed into the cab together, windows already cranked down, the seats still worn but welcoming. Michael slid a cassette into the old player, some dusty blues tune he hadn't played in years, and handed her the keys. "Go on," he said. "She's all yours." Elise blinked. "You're letting me drive?" Michael leaned back, arm resting on the window. "You fixed her. Might as well take her out for a spin." She shifted into gear, the truck rumbling like it was glad to be alive again. They rolled down the winding back roads, wind in their faces, music loud, laughter louder. Lily sat in the back seat, hair flying wild, arms out the window like wings. Elise glanced at Michael, smiling so wide it hurt. "This," she shouted over the wind, "is freedom." He laughed, eyes on her, more than the road. "No," he said, "this is living." And for once no one needed directions. They were exactly where they wanted to be. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a gentle amber glow across the living room walls. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, coating the fields in quiet white, just as it had all those years ago. Elise sat curled on the couch, a blanket draped over her legs, and her youngest daughter nestled beside her, wide-eyed and curious. "Tell me the story again," the little girl whispered, voice muffled beneath the fleece. Elise smiled, brushing a strand of dark hair from her daughter's forehead. "The snowstorm story?" She nodded. "The one with the broken-down car and the man with the warm coat." Elise leaned back, eyes flicking to the window, where the driveway disappeared into a soft blur of snowfall. Michael was out in the garage with Lily, teaching her how to change a tire, just like he had taught Elise once upon a time. She turned back to her daughter and began. "Well, once, a long time ago, I got stuck in the snow. I was all alone, sitting on a curb outside a grocery store with nothing but a paper bag and a very heavy heart." Her daughter's eyes widened. "You were crying?" "I was," Elise admitted. "I didn't have a place to go. I didn't even know where I belonged anymore." What happened next? A man stopped. He wore an old brown coat that smelled like engine grease and coffee. He gave it to me without asking why I was crying. He didn't know my name, didn't care about who I used to be. He just helped. "Was it Daddy?" Elise nodded. "It was." There was a long pause, the fire popping in the silence. Then her daughter asked, "Why do you think he stopped?" Elise looked down, her voice soft. "Because sometimes people don't see your title or your past or your mistakes. Sometimes they just see you, and if you're lucky, they don't save you. They see you, clearly enough that you remember how to save yourself." She pulled her daughter closer. "That ride didn't just take me somewhere warm. It took me home, to myself, to your dad, to you." Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, Elise held the miracle of her past and the future she never knew she was building, one small, unexpected kindness at a time.